Welcome to the Hopevale podcast. I'm Tamara Schlatter, the Bay City Campus Director, and I'll be your host as we dive into our current sermon series, Equipped, Fighting the Right Fight the Right Way. I'm joined by Pastor Josh as we wrap up our exploration of the armor of God as found in Ephesians chapter 6. Good morning. How are you?
Good morning. Doing great. How about you?
Yeah, great. Love snow in April.
Well, we got a nice day yesterday, so you got to take them.
Take them when you can get them.
Yeah, you can't focus on the negative. We're getting closer to summer. The sun is getting closer and closer. It's getting warmer, brighter for longer.
I just keep reminding myself that we had a really warm November.
Yeah,
and so maybe we're not
gorgeous fall.
Yeah,
gorgeous.
Yeah. And so the warm weather will come, and maybe it'll last longer.
Yeah,
so,
I love it.
Anyways, we have a lot to talk about today, I think.
Perfect.
So I kind of want to just dive right in.
Let's do it.
We're talking about the sword of the Spirit, which is the Word of God, and how we rightly apply that in our lives. And I think people have this natural tendency to lean towards extending more grace or extending more truth. And I'm going to guess that people that lean towards truth maybe have been quite challenged by your message yesterday. And so I want you to take, actually you already told us that you would, take that concept of truthing in love that you talked about from Ephesians 4:15. I want us to start there. You said you'd show us your homework for that verse and how that idea kind of changes how we speak, truth and love.
Yeah, that's great. And I think, people maybe who are more on the truth side are feeling a little bit more challenged. But I actually think that when we understand this, and hopefully when we walk through it, it's actually challenging to you no matter which side you're on. So we looked at Ephesians 4:15, and we said, hey, this idea of speaking the truth in love. Speaking the truth in the Greek is actually all one word. Okay. And so it doesn't grammatically work in English. So to say it literally, what scholars will tell us is that it really should be truthing in love is how you would say it if it was like a kind of direct quote. Obviously, that's not real English, so it leaves some questions of, well, what does this fully mean? Yeah. And so I was trying to push on it a little bit yesterday, but yeah, I do want to share just some of the thoughts behind all of this. So the truthing is not just any truth, even in general. Paul is talking about a very specific truth. He's talking about the truth of the gospel. So Paul refers to the word of truth, the gospel. He uses that phrase in Ephesians 1:13. So this is all like kind of leading up to, right? Like, because we're reading this cohesive book. Right. We call it a book. It's really a letter, right? That he is writing. And so he's using prior things that he's stated, essentially, right, to reference back. And so they would already have these things in their mind. So if the word of truth is the gospel, the good news, then the gospel is all of the things that we talk about regularly. It's that you've been rescued from sin and wrath and darkness and even death itself, that you've been forgiven and raised to new life, that you're raised with Christ, Paul will even say. And so what that means is, as Paul is writing to this church community, again, keeping in mind that this armor, as we've been saying throughout, is collective armor. It's not really individual armor. It does apply in some senses. For sure, there's carryover there, but it is armor that we are collectively putting on. So what this means is our words, the way that we speak, and even the way that we live, we're going to see, is to be shaped by this truth of the gospel, because we're people of the gospel. We're people of the good news. This is the story that has changed our lives. So truthing, I think, means speaking the gospel and its like meaning or implications, if you will. And so saying challenging things that include saying challenging things that align with a gospel reality. So it's not that we aren't saying hard things. We are saying hard things, but they are gospel shaped. They are rooted in grace and humility, and ultimately even redemption or reconciliation, right? So again, I was kind of walking through like different examples of like we made up a scenario of, if we have someone who's, robbed a bank, and then we kind of broke it down into, well, then what does that look like in that scenario versus a scenario where we're in a marriage or we're in a co-working relationship, and how do we interact with that? Well, all of those are based on the idea that these are gospel-shaped conversations that we are having with one another about reminding ourselves of the truth of where we've been, of who we are, and where we're going, right? And so that starts to change. So that's the truthing part that I think we see, okay? So you back up to Ephesians 1, and you see that the truth comes from the gospel, and that has implications then for how we think about truth. Then there is the love part, and that love part is not sentimental. It's not a nice tone or being charitable. It's about this idea of God's love, in fact, being the foundation for everything in our lives. So it is, Paul will say in Ephesians 1 that it is God's love that chose us and adopted us. It is his love that saved us and raised us with Christ. He'll say in chapter 2. Jesus loved us by giving himself for us, he'll say in chapter 5. So knowing that love, its purpose is to ground us and secure us. And then what we're called to do is we're called to live out lives of love. Okay. Right. So all of that to say, we have this truthing and we have this love. So then truthing and love becomes this idea then of gospel-centered conversations that we're having, or communication, and in gospel-shaped relationships. So what that does not mean, and maybe some people heard it that way, but what that doesn't mean is that we don't have hard conversations.
Right.
We have lots of hard conversations because we're people who really care about the truth. But all of the conversations are pointing towards, are working towards the idea of building others up in the calling of who Christ has called them to be as sons and daughters, right? So I just think of my kids, there's, if you were to come to my house, right, and you were to talk in a way that was really negative or condescending or rude or putting my kids down, I would probably take issue with that, right?
I think so.
I think any parent would.
Yeah.
But there's a sense in which, no, the idea is you would come in and you would be, or I would be, or whoever is building them up and calling them. So even when my kids make a mistake or they don't live up to whatever it is in a certain situation, it's not that I'm avoiding having that conversation with them or I don't want to tell them what is really happening here. No, part of the call of this gospel truth is in fact that I am entering in and I'm inviting them into this new reality, this new way of living that we don't have to live according to that way anymore. And if you're going to keep living and grabbing onto things that are harmful to you, or if you keep making decisions like that, maybe it will be harmful to you, and it's going to lead to pain down the road that maybe you can't foresee or whatever it may be, right? So again, we're not avoiding truth by any means, and in fact, Paul, even the context of where verse 15 comes from, if you read the beginning of chapter 4, that you can even read probably in your Bible, though it's not in the original language, but there will be a heading there that's talking about this idea of building up the community and protecting against false teaching and immaturity. He's trying to figure out, he's explaining how to mature the body. Yeah. And he even says that maturing in the body is the opposite of false teachings, of immaturity, of spiritual immaturity. So part of Paul's response to this idea of speaking the truth in love, or as we're saying, truthing in love, is literally guarding against this idea of, we're not engaging in false teachings. We're not just believing whatever we want to believe. It's not just to come and make up your own story. No, the story is based off of the gospel. It's based off of creation, fall, redemption, new creation. It's based off of you were lost and you were filled with your own your own sin and brokenness and pain, but the story is that Jesus has come and he has rescued you, and so you are a new creation. And since that is the case, now go and live accordingly. And so I think that's what truthing in love is. It's speaking with the heart of Jesus for the good of others and for the church. And that's who we're called to be. But I do think the last thing I'd maybe say about that, and maybe have some thoughts that we can interact with, but I do think that Paul's imagery, even in sharing about the sword of the Spirit, it is this short sword, right? So to me, that logically makes sense. So the weapon we are given is words, and it's for relationships that we're close and involved with, and that we can, I can't speak gospel implications necessarily. I mean, I can in a general sense, for sure. Like even now I'm speaking in a general sense, but I can't like to speak into your life in a rhema sort of way that we talked about. I actually have to know your life and what's going on. I have to be involved in your life. Right. So I think that's part of that's all of how Paul is kind of baking this all together at one time. Is this is what it looks like to carry this sword of the Spirit. This is what truthing in love looks like. This is how you enter in and you use this weapon for a way that is going to bring healing and not harm.
Yeah, I think you started to answer my next question there is, are we always called to speak the truth? Because some people don't have a problem speaking the truth. They're not uncomfortable leaning into hard conversations, but it is always our place. And how do you know when it's your place to step in and speak truth?
Yeah. It's a great question. A couple things come to my mind. One, I would want to look to Jesus again. So Jesus is walking around and you see him speak the truth. We looked at the interactions of up against the devil in the wilderness yesterday. We looked at Peter and we looked at Pilate. My hunch is all three of them have more things that they believe that are not true or right at that moment. And Jesus does not correct every false thing that they think. Maybe another way to say it, if we go back to my kids, there's a lot of things that they don't understand about the world. They come back with just fascinating information that they've learned from their friends or, was discussed at the lunch table at school or whatever it is, right? And it's really fascinating because, so is my job as a parent, since I know the truth, to sit there and explain all the truths to them or is there an age appropriate, like this is what's happening in my 11-year-old's life and this is what's happening in my 6-year-old's life and, meeting them where they are. So I think what I want to say is looking at Jesus, just thinking about how relationships work, thinking about how I learn and grow. Like if I'm learning something new, whether it's a sport or an instrument or a field of study or whatever, you don't know all of the things right away, right? Like you're learning and you have an instructor who maybe does know all of the things, let's say, but they're not going to dump all of that on you at one point. So all of that to say, I think we have to go back to, this is where discernment and wisdom and even this idea of rhema, right? Of like, you have taken in the writings of Scripture, the graphe, the logos, the meaning. You understand it. It's saturated your life. So now I can enter into moments and be discerning. What is it, God, that you are saying? So a moment that I will have in my life, sometimes I'll be doing some like kind of pastoral counseling with people. And it's interesting because they will bring up things that, multiple things that they're working on that are problems or issues, or they'll bring up things that they say that are in the Bible that aren't, or whatever it is. So it's my job to sit there and say, well, do I need to correct all of this?
Right.
If you come in and you're sharing, and you say whatever, different things that I'm like, oh, wow, that's not even close to true. Like, is that really the point of what we're doing in this exercise? Or am I trying to discern where's the Spirit at work in this person's life, in Tamara's life or whomever I'm sitting with? And trying to figure out what is the word that God has for them in this moment. So that's not me running away from truth. Yeah. But I'm sure Jesus had a lot of things that he could have corrected with Pilate. He had a lot of things that he was throughout years with Peter that he's working on, right? So there's this attentiveness and this paying attention to what the Spirit is doing. So it's not always black and white, and it's not always just stating what is true. Sometimes it may be. I'm not saying it is never that, or that we shouldn't do that. But there's these moments of, again, it's just learning and pressing into practicing what is the Spirit inviting me to say right now, and then trusting that process.
So I'm thinking to 1 Corinthians, the first thing that it says love is that it's patient. And so that's what I'm hearing you say, is like there has to be this patience as you're working with people, because we oftentimes want to run ahead of the Spirit.
Yeah.
I think.
Patience with other people. How about just patience with ourselves?
Yeah.
Too. But I mean, it's a brilliant point that you bring up of like, love is patient, love is kind, right? Like, so when I'm talking about love, it would be wrong not to, I mean, that's how Paul's,
if you're going to truth
Paul,
and love,
how are you going to define love? Well, the first two words I'm going to use is it's patient and it is kind, right?
Yeah.
And so sometimes I'm not even patient with myself of like, oh, I should be better. I should have done this. I should have all these things. And again, that is the truth component, but we are in process, and we need time and space to be able to figure things out. Otherwise you turn into, and this is kind of one of the problems that Jesus is combating against the religious leaders of the day, is that they have no space for love to be patient, for it to be kind, right? They have an idea of, hey, this woman was caught in adultery, so here's the rules, right? Jesus has a bigger vision. Maybe we would say this truthing in love, where he doesn't avoid the reality of her situation or anyone else's that he deals with, but he also is imagining a better future and calling them with this gospel truth of like, listen, there is better for you. You know, you can live into this new reality that is available to you. So again, it's not avoiding any sort of truth, or, you know, we only deal with things that feel good or any of those sorts of things. It is being willing to see the big vision of what Jesus and his kingdom bring, of what God has done for us. And when we remember the gospel story for us, it's a lot easier, at least for me, it's a lot easier when I can kind of start at that point to then enter in with, man, God has been so patient with me.
Yeah. He's
been so kind to me. Man, when I'm sitting with this person, or when I'm talking to this person, I maybe don't even agree with them, but I want to be patient and kind to them. And I just believe that if people keep getting introduced to Jesus, and they keep being handed a clear, like, what it would look like to say yes to him, that eventually Jesus is going to win their hearts, and he's going to win their minds, and he's going to win all of their allegiance. And so I know I've said some of these things previously on this podcast with you, but it's like, it's so ingrained into how I think we need to enter in. It's so ingrained in me, and how I think we need to enter in with other people, of just, it is that slow, patient ferment, if you will, that kindness, that love that's inviting people. So I do want to hold that
over and over. I mean, so what I'm hearing is that truthing in love isn't about behavior modification. That's often what we're trying to do when we drop a truth bomb on somebody. We don't like the way that you're acting because it affects us in some way, or because we care about you deeply and we feel like whatever your behavior isn't what's best for you. And so we drop these truth bombs, but it shouldn't be about behavior modification. It should be about heart transformation. You know, that Jesus is always pointing to hope, to restoration, to something better. Right. And if we're not patient, we come in and drop it, and we just try and change people's behavior instead. Yeah. No, I love that. That's exactly it. And that's the moments, at least in my life, where I'm quick to, you know, again, for me, it's just my children. Like, it's so easy to move into behavior modification. And sometimes that is appropriate, right? Like, sometimes I need my 6-year-old to respond to me about looking both ways when crossing the road. That was actually exactly what so one of the questions that came in was, how do you take into account people's feelings, and does the truth ever trump their feelings? And that was exactly what came to my mind. Is like, well, if my child is about to run out into the road and get hit by a car, I'm going to scream at them, and I'm not going to care about their feelings. I'm going to care about their safety first. But that's an extreme situation. That's not most of the situations that we're probably encountering. Yeah. And I think most times, I mean, I'm thinking of maybe different situations. Like, you have
someone in your life who, maybe is a prodigal and just has walked away from the faith, let's say, and has really big problems with the church or Christianity, or feels like it's trying to control people, or, whatever. It's something like that. Or it's someone who you interpret things very differently in the world. And I think in that there's still space. I mean, I disagree with a lot of people about a lot of things.
Well, that's
sometimes
you're
I
just
disagree.
Always right, right?
What's that?
It's because you're always right.
Well, I don't know that I am. I was going to say my follow-up line was sometimes I disagree with myself.
Okay.
Like if I give myself long enough, like I'm constantly in progress, right?
Yeah.
Like some of the things that I would have said, 5, 10, 15 years ago, I wouldn't say anymore, because I've learned some new things. I've grown, I've experienced more of life. Right. So I also don't want to put where I am in my life on everybody else in their journey. Right. Like I want to understand and appreciate where each person is in their journey and figure out, what does love look like for this person?
Yeah.
So again, that's not me avoiding, and that's not me not saying hard things. I have found that truthing in love is really difficult. And this is back to kind of how we started, of the do you lean more truth or more grace? And this is where I find it incredibly challenging, because if you are by nature more of the truth person, the idea of truthing in love is going to require more of you than you want to give, probably. Because you're going to have that impulse to drop truth bombs or just state what you think is true. And then you're not going to want to enter in with relationship. You're not going to want to walk with the person. And that's Paul's whole point, is like, no. If you're going to enter in with truth, then like there's a part of this falls on you and your shoulders to carry. And again, we get that from the gospel, because that's literally the whole gospel. Jesus comes and says, your problem is now my problem, and I'm going to be here to help you fix it. Right.
Yeah.
If you're more of the grace person, and you're maybe more conflict avoidant, sometimes that goes with that, then the idea of needing to speak up at times and needing to have a voice for whatever it is, your own boundaries or concerns you have about a project at work, or, things that you've just been letting fester in your marriage, or, all of those different things. It's actually, so it doesn't matter where you're starting at. Your starting point. The idea of truthing in love is, this is going to be really difficult. And it's going to be really hard. And I will just tell you, in my own life, like, man, there's been lots of moments where I've had to live into truthing in love, where I have to go have conversations with people that I'm like, man, I'd rather just not have this conversation, and we could just, bury our heads in the sand and pretend like it's not there. Right. I've also been on the receiving end of those conversations, but I do think they're the most powerful. And back to your thoughts of like transformative work, it's not just behavior modification. Do you know how powerful it is when someone sits there and says, listen, I love you. I am for you. I'm not going anywhere. Because that's some of our deep-seated fears.
I think a lot of people have experienced that.
Yeah, we don't, and that's because of how we interact with truth and how we think about. We've got a malformed idea of how we use truth in this world. And so the Bible's giving us this new imagination of, man, how powerful that is in the moments where people who I know love me have been willing to speak up. Like, how humbling is that? How empowering is that? I mean, it's challenging, and it's not always words that I want to hear in that moment. Peter didn't want to hear those words in the moment. So it's not like, it's not a feeling thing if we mean like people can't at some point be in disagreement, or even a little like, it said the words of Jesus cut to Peter's heart, sort of a thing, and he wept bitterly. So all of that, I think, is a part of this conversation. And again, it's this calling of, no matter where you're starting in, this idea Paul is laying is quite radical, because it requires us to really enter in and to be for each other, which is his imagination for how the church fights in this spiritual battle. Is that we're not against each other, we are for each other, and we are standing united. And part of that is speaking truth, but it's in love, or truthing in love.
Yeah, but I have found part of that work that you're talking about that makes it kind of hard to want to do this is we have to do the work in ourselves first. I think you have to, as I've grown in truthing and love, I've had to learn a little bit more about myself in the process and grow in my relationship. First of all, learning whether you're leaning towards grace or leaning towards truth. Sometimes people just don't even realize that they're leaning so heavily one way.
Yeah.
But recognizing your own issues. Sometimes we want to drop a truth bomb on somebody when really maybe it has nothing to do with them and it's issues that are going on in our own lives.
Yeah.
You know, we kind of a funny story. We had Bay City students met last night and we were talking about this and talking about how one of the girls, her little brother can annoy her often. But sometimes if you step back, maybe you realize you're just hungry or you're just tired
Sure.
and like you want to drop all this truth on him.
Right.
And really he's not doing anything wrong. I've experienced this in my own house, watch my kids interact this way. And it's like, I think you just need to go take a nap.
Right.
I think you just need to go get a snack.
Right.
And so we have to do an examination in our own heart and what's going on and understanding ourselves. What are our hurts? What are our wounds? What are our natural tendencies before we can try and do that work?
Yeah. Or just
somebody
even,
else.
I mean, I think one of the things we're all as a culture becoming more aware of is just our own anxieties would be another way of saying that.
Yeah.
So it can be hunger, it can be being tired and irritable, but sometimes we just have all of our own animosity or fear or things we're worried about and we're looking for some way to have an outlet.
Yeah.
And sometimes what happens is people, even people that we love, become kind of like the place where we unleash all of that, unfortunately. So
Well,
I think that's really great.
Sometimes in love too. And sometimes we love you so much. We just so desperately want a better way for you that we can't sit, again, going back to being patient, we can't sit in it. And we're just so anxious. And maybe that is, again, our own fears and anxieties that are controlling that we feel like we have to fix this in you now before the absolute worst happens.
Yeah. And that's part of the hard part of truthing in love too, is you're giving up outcomes. So Jesus comes and never once does he power up, never once does he control. He's just willing to continue to be truthing in love, and people can respond how they want to him. So again, I think that's part of the work that we have in all roles of our life. But as the church, is the only outcome we are assured of is that victory is ours in the end. But that's not guaranteed for today or in the next 5 years or whatever. And for Jesus, it wasn't guaranteed at all. It led to him literally losing his life is how victory was secured. So there's even this piece of how we, again, when we get into these fights, we want victory, we want control, we want certain outcomes, right? But truthing in love is learning to be open-handed and surrender those outcomes, which is really difficult work.
Yeah. So, I mean, how would you practically speak to someone who feels like they're in a losing battle right now? I mean, we constantly say that the fight isn't against each other, it's against the enemy, but sometimes it surely feels like the fight is with somebody else.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I want to start with just trying to remind myself, even when it really feels like it, like, okay, my battle is not against this person. And I mean, I think that's a good starting point to maybe mention literally 100 times in our mind before we go have a conversation with someone of, can I even enter into this conversation being for this person? And maybe for some of us, the answer is I can't right now. So maybe it's not a good time to enter in.
So maybe that goes back to my question. Are we always called to speak truth if you can't go into it?
Well, and you're part of the other part of like doing our own work, right? So like before I can speak truth to someone else, maybe I need to speak a little truth to myself, right? And there's some truth for me to like, if I can't have this idea of truthing in love and want God's best for this person in the moment, maybe I'm not ready to enter into this conversation, that's you know? Point. So I think that's the first thing. The second thing I would say is, I mean, back to the idea of, if people are losing a battle right now. Again, I mean, I want to offer some caveats. We maybe should have done this earlier in the conversation, but you know, what this doesn't mean is if you're in some sort of like abusive relationship or you're an employee who's literally never doing their job, and now your employer's like, saying, hey, we're going to put you on probation and you're not being treated unfairly. Like, you know, so this is kind of assuming like just general operating, just want to make sure we say that. But I think if you're in what feels like a losing battle, if this is just, hey, we see the world differently, and the thing that we're talking about is hypotheticals sometimes get so hard for me because I run in a million different directions with them. Like, what is the point of conflict over? Is it a theological issue? Is it a relational issue? Is it a fill in the blank issue? But I think what I would want to just put on like as an overarching kind of headline for us is, at the end of the day, being a Christian is ultimately about being faithful. And it is about practicing love. And it is about growing in the fruit of the Spirit. And it is about caring for and wanting the best for the other person. And sometimes that's going to come at a cost, or sometimes there's going to be disagreement, or you're going to feel compelled to try and win them over. So let's go back to the prodigal example. If I have a prodigal, there could be part of that where I'm trying to own that, and I'm trying to like force results. And part of that's coming out of like, I'm really hurt, and I want what's best for my kid, right? Like I love them, and man, I just want something different here. Totally get that. But what I would want to do in that situation or any other situation is just say, okay, so Jesus loves this person more than I do. So much so that he was willing to come and give his life for them. What does it look like to enter in and to see them where they're at and the things that they're wrestling with? And what is like a small step that Jesus could have for them? So maybe, I mean, this is all again made up, but maybe they have a very distorted view of who Jesus is or who God is. And so maybe the conversation, like literally the conversation is just, in genuine curiosity, we say this all the time around here, of having compassionate curiosity, like, tell me about your concerns about who you think God is or Jesus. And let's just say they make up an extreme picture of God of like, he is about behavior modification. He's not about transformation, something along those lines. I mean, maybe the only step in that moment is just say like, oh, is that what you think about God? Like, oh, that, there's been moments where I've leaned into that. I think I've learned that that's just more of a me thing. Yeah. And the more I've gotten to know Jesus, and Jesus is the perfect revelation of who God is, that's not who I've found Jesus to be. What I've found is actually he really wants heart transformation, and he really walks with me in patience, and is brings his love that is patient and kind, and all these, you know what I mean? So it's like, and maybe that's just it. Like, it's just leaving it at that, and that's like the next just kind of moment for them to sit in and like, oh, so do I have the right picture of who Jesus is? Or maybe my picture of who God is or Jesus is or whatever is off. Or maybe the people who taught me were giving me their version and their own junk that was mixed up in that. Right. So again, I there's a million different ways we could go, but in that scenario, like I'm just looking for like, And even in that moment, let's say, so back to the idea of losing, like if I'm entering in with that posture with my prodigal, let's say, in some senses, I mean, if I'm counting losing as they're not agreeing with me or they're not doing my desired outcome, then I guess that would be losing. To me, really, the only losing though is if I don't enter in and I don't love them like Jesus would love them, and then it's on them figuring it out, and it's on Jesus, and I'm just trying to work with them in that. So sometimes if you're in that situation, that's what I say. Now, sometimes you're in like conflict, and it's like, oh, it feels like I'm losing in this situation. And again, I would say the way that we do things is really kind of the most important thing about us. That's who we are as the church. We are to be a community that is truthing. And so we model that by how we actually live our lives. And so being willing to die to myself and being willing to not have to have the last word. And, there's just so much back and forth right now in our culture of using different arguments, and it's like they just everyone just yells over everyone else, right? And so in all of that, that's where I would say truthing in love. And even if we're losing, I think there's a way, losing it by the world's standards.
Right.
I think there's a way of doing that actually is really beautiful and is really compelling and is what we're called to do. And I trust Jesus enough to say, well, if it works for him, then, and that's his invitation to us, then that's what I want to pursue.
So would it be fair to say it's better to lose in love than it is to fight in a way that is against the ways of Jesus?
Oh yeah. I mean, you can't.
That takes a little humility, maybe.
Say that again.
Takes a little humility, maybe.
It takes humility. You cannot win in the kingdom of God with any tactics of the kingdom of this world. We live in an upside down kingdom. All of the tools, resources that we have, they look very different. I mean, some of them are the same, but they're utilized differently. So, yeah, I mean, in a world, if we were to go back to like our voter guide series, in a world where there's donkeys and elephants that are constantly playing power games with each other and blaming each other and doing all these things, this is where I think we as a church can offer a beautiful story of actually how life could be. And it's inviting people into the kingdom and the way of the Lamb. And it does look very different. So I mean, part of me even wonders, as we've had this conversation, I was like, when people hear, well, so we just throw truth out and we just we're just say kind things or grace things, right? Part of me is saying like, well, yeah, if I understand where that question in some sense is coming from, if we're in a donkey elephant world where that's the script that's in our head. And that literally is the argument that's being had of what is truth, and we have the truth and our facts are right and your facts are right. Like this is just 24/7 the world we're living in right now. But again, this idea of that we're being given through scripture, the imagination is completely different than that, because it is about how we enter in and how we walk with each other. And so it is based off of truth. We're not, Paul makes it very clear throughout Ephesians that he's not wanting us to live into false teachings, but the truthing in love part is us then becoming literally the embodiment, the expression of that. And you're not going to find that in donkeys and elephants or anywhere else in the world.
Yeah. So do you think it's coincidental that it's the sword of the Spirit, that there's so much spirit work in delivering truth in this versus like putting on the breastplate of righteousness? Like how much work there is of the Holy Spirit in this, and how much we have to rely on that as we enter into these conversations. Yeah,
I think that's definitely it. I mean, and I try to even say in the sermon, like the Spirit is not, the sword of the Spirit is not our sword, right?
Yeah.
It's his sword. So we are learning, well, if it's his, then how do we utilize it in a way that implies that he's very involved in this process, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's what you see with Jesus, where Jesus lives a life that is fully submitted to the Father and the Spirit's leading. And he's the one who lives as the true human. So he has given us the example then of what it means for us to do that.
Yeah.
And so sometimes that means speaking truth to power. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it means holding our tongue. Mm-hmm. And a lot of life is somewhere in between and figuring it out. And it's not like there's always, we should caution too. It's not like there's always a perfect, okay, they said A, now I say B. And that's part of where we get into this conversation of like, well, so how does this look like? So what am I supposed to say?
Right.
But again, that's where the rhema comes in, because my life has been so saturated with scripture and who Jesus is and how the Spirit works that it just becomes this natural thing. And even if you and I are working something out and I misstep a little bit, I have the tools and the resources to, recalibrate, to ask for forgiveness, to whatever, so that we can quickly keep moving towards that goal, that mission that we're on, as opposed to getting derailed by it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, as we wrap up, is there any final thoughts from the whole sermon series that you want to share, encourage, clarify?
I think, it's been a really fun series. Mm-hmm. It's fun to revisit things from when we were, at least in my life, like this was very much like you put it on the flannel graph and was a part of my childhood. So it's fun to go back and to kind of pull out some of the deeper, richer context of what does this mean. And I think, what seemed to be coming out of this series was helping us have some language for what a lot of people are experiencing in their life. So there were just lots of situations of people like identifying like, oh, so this thing is actually spiritual warfare.
Right.
And if that's spiritual warfare, then how do I actually enter in? And so I don't know, I'm really just encouraged of where God's been leading us over the past several months and just kind of how this is all, kind of cohesively flowed together. It seems like he's been preparing and planning this for us for some time.
Yeah.
And so it's fun for me, being on this side of it, like we do a lot of hard work of trying to figure out where we're going and what we're doing and how to communicate things and how to bring people along. And so like, I always love when we get to the end of a series and we get to look back and kind of see, wow, this is what God was doing, and this is what God did in this person's life and that person's life, and how he's speaking and moving. Like that's the exciting stuff of all of this stuff, is seeing how it's really impacting real people's lives. So yeah, I'm excited and encouraged by that. I'm hopeful that it gives us some good imagination and tools and ideas even in the days ahead of how do we continue to stand together as a church? How do we be a beacon of light and salt for our community in the Great Lakes Bay region and around the world? And I think if we keep, as we kind of learned here this last week, if we keep truthing in love and we keep being that community, that God has good things in store for us. So
well, I think that's a perfect way to end this particular podcast, that truthing in love takes a lot of work, but when you get to the other side of it, you're going to see the fruit, and be really grateful that you put the work into it.
That's a good word. It's a good word.
Awesome. Thanks for being here.
Yeah.